Today I'm going to do part 3 in my series on overtraining, and I'm going to explain a bit of the difference between overtraining and overreaching and how they're defined and differentiated in the exercise science world and professional sports world. Because there's a huge discrepancy between what happens in these worlds and what goes on in the magazine and fitness subculture. There isn't enough communication back and forth in the sense that people who write for magazines and people who are often involved in the exchange at the layman's level of training advice, and even personal trainers have no clue what seems to go on in the world of exercise science or professional sports or professional level coaching of athletes. They seem to actually have no understanding or grasp at all of the topic. So I want to jump into that a little bit. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. And give you guys a side chest. Okay, on to overtraining versus overreaching. What you have to understand is that overtraining is not an actual action. It is not something that you do. It is a physical state of being. It is a medical condition that can actually be diagnosed by a sports physician. And the type of symptoms you look for overtraining are elevated resting heart rate, intense frequent muscle cramping, elevated blood pressure, insomnia, anxiety, depression, irritability, mood swings, and a very large decline in performance. And by large, it doesn't mean that your bench press goes down by 5 or 10 pounds. It means that if your normal work sets are 225 for 5 reps, when you get under 205 and try to bench it, the bar just drops and hits you in the chest. That is what I mean by a severe decline in performance. And overtraining is not something that happens overnight. It is something that generally takes months to achieve, and it takes usually a lot of volume and a lot of intensity to reach that state. It's not something easily reached, and the more conditioned an athlete is, the harder it is for them to reach that state, meaning there are athletes out there who lift weights for 20, 30, 40 hours per week without overtraining, and they lift heavy. And the thing is that they've built their conditioning up to such a state that it actually takes a huge workload for them to be at any risk whatsoever for overtraining. And for the average lifter, and I'm going to get into the individual things of this a bit later, of the lay person versus the professional athlete, in a later part of the series. But for the average person, if you're only lifting weights 3 or 4 hours a week, you can completely disregard this entire series and you can forget the word overtraining. There's no need to ever even consider this word or even know the meaning of it, because it's not going to happen. You might suffer other side effects from your lifestyle, but you absolutely cannot and will not overtrain lifting weights for 3 or 4 hours a week. And in fact, I would go so far as to say you're going to struggle, if you're out of the novice phase, to even make particularly fast gains at such a low volume. So you're neither training optimally nor at any risk whatsoever. Now, in the professional sports world and in the exercise science world, there's a term that's called overreaching. And in layman's terms, these two are often confused. When someone hears about someone overreaching, to them, that is what they call overtraining very frequently, but it's not classified as overtraining in the science world. It's called overreaching. And overreaching means the short-term state of either training at your maximum performance or workload capacity, or pushing slightly beyond it. You are pushing yourself as an athlete, whether it's in the weights or sprinting or swimming or whatever your sports endeavor is, beyond the threshold to which your body can adapt. And that is called overreaching. Overreaching is very, very heavily used in the sports world and at the serious natural bodybuilding level and drug-free powerlifting level. So all of these things, both drug-free and enhanced athletes who are educated on the topic, utilize overreaching. So the question then becomes, why would anybody overreach? Why would they push beyond their capacity to recover? And the reason for that being is that we have known for decades now in exercise science and in the professional sports world that when you take athletes and instead of pushing them right up here to this level near their limits and holding them there consistently, that if you push them above it, and you overreach, and then rather than keep it consistent, you do periods of underreaching and an undulating wave, what you find is that they perform better at the end of a phase of training, meaning it will improve performance more rapidly over the course of several months than if you just held them consistently at a lower rate. And so what they do in the sports world is that they do periods of heavy overreaching followed by periods of deloading. And with a deload, you might actually take an entire week off from training, or you may take a week where you come in and train substantially lighter, and by that meaning 50% of the weights you're normally using at a lower volume, and you give your body time to adapt and recover, and then you push back into a phase of overreaching. And this is referred to in exercise science as the dual factor recovery model. And it has been found to be very effective. It is utilized in virtually all professional sports, and a lot of bodybuilders have picked up on this and use these same concepts, because what happens is that anytime you can increase progressive overload, you grow more quickly, you gain muscle. And by improving performance this way in the gym and using these methods to bring your overall numbers up over a period of 3 months, 6 months, or a year, at the end of that time period, you're able to put on a bit more muscle mass. So it is important that you know the difference between these two. And for those seeking optimal gains, it's very important that you utilize this. And you'll note in my novice routine that I've written that I incorporate mini deloads in the form of weight resets, and I push people to their limits and I have them back off. Whereas when I write intermediate routines later, I'm going to do harder pushing with full deload periods relatively frequently to achieve the same thing in an intermediate. And what you find is that the beauty of deloads, and what's been found in the exercise science world, is that a deload, if someone is only mildly showing symptoms of overtraining, they're not full-blown overtraining, a deload will remove those symptoms. And oftentimes a simple 1-week deload will return them back to baseline, and 2 weeks later they're able to start progressing again and start setting records and things again when you deal with athletes. And so deloading is actually the best way to cure overtraining if you actually are exhibiting symptoms of it. And by doing them periodically right after a performance peak, right when your performance is peaked and you're getting to the point where you're getting close to stalling out and burning out, when you take a deload, if you do this frequently enough, you'll find that you can progress more quickly over a course of several months doing it this way. In addition to the fact that you will very rarely overtrain if frequent deloads are timed correctly, even pushing very heavy workloads and intensities and volumes. And so what you find is that this is the best remedy to deal with overtraining if you are actually at risk of reaching this state. And so that is the difference in the exercise science world between overtraining and overreaching. And remember, overreaching chronically can lead to overtraining, but it does take a while. It's not something that's going to happen in 3 or 4 weeks. And so it's important to remember that overtraining is not an action. It is a chronic physical state of being, and it is actually a medical issue that can be diagnosed. So just by pushing hard and pushing yourself to the limits or adding extra workload for a week, you're not actually overtraining. You're simply increasing your volume and workload, and you might be overreaching, but overtraining doesn't happen that quickly, and overtraining is not an action, it is a physiological state. And in the next part of the series, I will go into individual factors and some of the differences between athletes and the layperson who has other stressors that can impact their recovery rates and things. And I will probably break down some of the differences between overtraining and other physical conditions that are often mistaken for it and related, such as chronic fatigue, malnutrition, sleep deprivation, things like that. And I hope this has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.